Hi, Richard. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on this episode of the Blockcast, where we interview innovative blockchain companies and influencers and how they plan to impact global industry with blockchain technologies. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
And this episode is brought to you by the World Data Forum. Visit them at worlddataforum.com. It's September 19th and 20th in Barcelona, Spain at the World Trade Center. We have a massive lineup of speakers, including Jennifer Robinson, David Brin, Ralph Merkel, among many others. I know, Richard, you'll be joining us there and have helped and been very influential in the event for us, so thank you so much for that. And Richard, I'll let you take it from here. Thanks so much for joining us. We'd love to learn a little bit more about your background. Did a lot of research, and you've been involved in so many various campaigns. Very looking forward to the conversation.
Quite, yeah. So am I. Yeah, no, I've got into PR. I've been doing PR for 14 years now because I used to be in advertising, and I used to work for a chap called Richard Desmond, who's like a billionaire who did own the Daily Express, Sunday Express, Daily Star, OK magazine over here, and I was in charge of regional, international revenue hunting for him. So I had a team of 9 people making all this money for someone else. But then I decided that what was more interesting was PR, because sort of just selling, filling white holes on pages with ads seemed to be a bit boring.
Right.
So I jumped the fence and went into PR. And my first clients were some of the entrepreneurs I used to deal with on advertising side. So all the BBC dragons with my early clients. Like there's a guy called Duncan Bannatyne, and then I was doing James Caan from Dragon's Den. In America, it's called Shark Tank, but over it's called Dragon's Den. So anyway, so sort of built my name with all these celebrity entrepreneurs, and it went on and on and on from there.
Very interesting. That's very interesting. And Richard, I mean, you're one of the top and very experienced PR agents out there, and have represented some very big names. Jennifer Robinson, WikiLeaks, and Julian Assange. I know you also represented the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, which is absolutely very interesting to me specifically. Steven Segal. You have a huge roster of clients. What are the different challenges that you face in your work in each case? And, what are the most serious difficulties that you've kind of had in the past?
Well, the thing is, I've had my own personal battles with reputation anyway. So it's interesting because I started out in PR being like a corporate reputation person from a Dragon's Den point of view. Then suddenly I got, if you Google my name, you could think, oh dear, he's had his fair run himself. So, so linked to an accountant that did something, and then I got accused, and then I got criminalized, and then I had to defend myself. And how did I go about defending myself? So I'm the number one person to come to if you've been crushed by the media machine, if you like. Okay. So I've gone from all these sort of business people to now people who've been crushed across the world unfairly by the media machine.
Right.
Come to me now to say, well, can you help uncrush me? So I'm sort of like, yeah, I know a bit about it. So I've become the expert.
That's very interesting. Assange is a special case in that because he's locked away in the embassy and has been cut off from internet communication with the outside world for around 5 months at this point, how his story is controlled by the press has him extremely vulnerable to smear campaigns. How does one correct something like this? It seems like almost an impossible task.
Well, if you look at the freedom of speech movement, and it's interesting because it seems to be that the information, fake news and the truth, a lot of people don't know the difference anymore. So people with vested interests will put a lot of money behind peddling fake stories. And obviously someone like Julian Assange, who is apolitical, who doesn't take any side, gets caught in the drift, the riptide, if you like, of different agendas pushing out fake news about them. And I think the only way to do that is you're not going to eradicate the fake news, but you can flush it away. You and I were having a chat about that earlier with real positive information and truthful information that outcompetes or beats all that rubbish.
Sure.
Because there's no schoolmaster out there that's going to sort of tell off all the naughty boys and say, right, let's take that down. You're going to just be stronger and better and braver than the rest and flush it away. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. With the advent of Google, it's almost these days just who can get their content, indexed on Google most properly. It's a very interesting time.
I think that it's interesting, though, because it does seem to be, even with the social world, which seems to be completely separate from the traditional media world, there seems to be a massive canyon between the two worlds. credibility still comes from what you can get published in a traditional media environment. If you can get CNN to create an online asset, or you can create an online asset with the New York Times, and then share that across into the social world, there's real power if you can manage the two worlds. It's just that it's hard for these guys who've come from traditional media to understand what it takes to get viral traction online. Right. There seems to be these two worlds, and then the guys in the new media, if you like, don't really understand how to access the New York Times or CNN in any particular way. So there seems to be a bit of a merging going on at the moment. I mean, if you can do it and you can achieve it, then there is real power from that point of view.
Got it. Wow, that's extremely interesting. And, I mean, what is it about the amelioration of reputation subjected to smear campaigns that really interests you so much? It seems almost a preference to you, judging by a lot of the work you've had. And what motivates you to aid those in those smear campaigns?
Well, I suppose, like I said, it's my personal story, I suppose, in defending people who have been crushed by power, if you like. People have been given an unfair run of it, and it can be like an avalanche for them. But just understanding that. But I kind of like that sort of thing anyway, because it's like working with people like Vivienne Westwood, who are seen as the queen of punk.
Right.
I mean, she's just done a T-shirt about Julian Assange, calling him a true punk. So if anyone's a punk, here's the establishment who has twisted the truth and is managing you in a certain way, and someone who's prepared to up the ante. Actually, I used to have a theatre group when I was a child at the age of 12 called Up the Ante. So I've always had a disposition to sort of saying to things no and blowing that up and disrupting.
Right.
So I've got a propensity. But I can see a way when you're actually bashed into a corner, how you can use that huge amount of negative energy to your advantage if you fight back rather than being crushed and go on the defense. If you punch back harder, and armed with the truth is the best weapon, because you're going to win ultimately with that. But you must punch harder than they're punching. So you've got to take quite a robust, brutal approach.
Definitely.
Rather than go and hide in the corner. You will never win if you go and hide in the corner. You'll just get completely destroyed.
Right. Yeah.
It's like in cricket. I used to play cricket, and I used to love the fast bowlers because they're coming in at 140, 150 miles an hour, and they're doing all the hard work. They really want to destroy you, and you just need to put your bat in the right place and then take it over the line for 4 runs or 6 by using that huge momentum. And people who are basically being crushed by all the smear, if they handle it in a particular way, they can take that white water, that huge amount of energy that's firing at them, and then deflect and beat it at its own game if you play it a particular way, though. But most people's instincts are dominated by fear, and it doesn't work when you're operating with fear to handle that level of negativity.
Sure. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting time. There's so many different platforms these days, so many different modes of communication. I've always been very interested on the PR side, being an SEO expert myself. I've worked in SEO for over a decade. A lot of the times our kind of worlds collide, just because having a very good SEO campaign also means having a very good PR piece. Having a very good PR piece means having very good SEO to really get that content indexed. I've always been very interested in, you seem to kind of have worked in this world for a long time. What exactly goes in the day-to-day of being a PR agent? And, what's the day-to-day in Richard Hillgrove's world look like?
Well, it's kind of, you've got to go out and meet people as much as possible so you don't lose yourself in this sort of this sort of esoteric world. Because as you know, working with computers, you can sometimes lose yourself in that space. So you've got to make sure you're still authentic with the content, because I'm pretty much like you are about content. Right. And I'm quite taking a narrative and breaking it down into many, many tidy piles and then creating content. And then the whole thing is about then looking what's out there in the marketplace, what's trending on the news, and then grabbing hold of that and feeding it into your pre-planned content, so it has an appearance of authenticity to it. Constant flushing through of grabbing stuff which seems to be current, which changes by the hour out there,
Right.
and feeding it into your narrative and then representing it. So it becomes like one of those big sort of, it's like bouncing balls in a way. But but there's a book actually which I find quite interesting. There's a chap that was really big in the social space and understands a lot about PR. He used to be the head of innovation for Disney, and he wrote a book called The Social Organism.
Okay.
And his name's called Oliver Luckett, and he's based in Iceland. But he wrote a book, the guy called Mike Casey, recently, and I read it and I thought, this is the future of PR, and it's all linked to blockchain, which is interesting because he said, the whole last chapter of The Social Organism is talking about the true promise of social media.
Right.
Is a blockchain type environment where people get paid micropayments for the content they do.
Sure, right.
And there's no echo chambers and gating people based on their preferences. It's a true democratic experience. That means everyone's fair and equal in that environment, which is the opposite to the centralized structure of traditional media. Centralized structure of Facebook as well. Or you'd sort of think, wow, is Facebook there? Oh yeah, because they're sitting at the top and they're deciding what you're
what you're seeing, yeah.
And they're paying someone who spends enough money on a political campaign to make just you and your street think a certain way. And the blockchain-led social media, it hasn't happened properly yet, but it promises to happen next.
Definitely.
And that's fascinating because that suddenly everything has a free speech, democratic right to evolve as a concept. Groups of people might share it, and it will mutate and it will be copied by groups, which is a normal thing. Everything linked to the biological organism. Everything mutates, and the best stuff thrives, and the bad stuff gets excreted away.
Right.
And this guy was a biologist turned .com guru and wrote this book. And I'm thinking this really is quite an interesting manifesto. But the whole thing will be based on blockchain. From his point of view.
That's very interesting. I'll be sure to check it out.
Not going to get guys in suits deciding what you're supposed to think.
Right. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, I know there's been a lot of different projects out there, Steven being one of them. There's a lot of different projects. And I think that's where people kind of, I think that's the big opportunity in blockchain right now is there's a lot of these centralized structures, a lot of these centralized, whether it's in news, in social media, whether it's across different various government sectors. I think that power of decentralizing, building these decentralized autonomous organizations could really kind of bring us to that next wave of innovation.
Agreed.
And really bring in the best.
Once you've got the infrastructure in place, the way to power drive to that is understanding the pattern of narratives. That it's like baby rattles. It's like babies love a consistent sound, and we're not much different. And people hate to think that. They like to think every time they read a newspaper, everything in that paper in different sections is news, when it's not, it's olds.
Right.
It's actually repackaging with different characters, the same man who's been killed by in an interesting way. Here's another story about, it's all the same story over and over and over. And it's drama. So once you realize everything is about drama, that is entertainment. It's fucking or fighting.
Right.
A person interacting with an opposite and bashing away. And
right.
It's the narrative. Because if you went to a play when you were at school and watched on the stage, there was no baddie and there was no goodie, it would be a really boring hour and a half.
Very interesting.
So that's kind of where the challenges lie. So if the framework's been created, which is like a blockchain environment, which is democratic, you want to influence that. You understand how people interact with narratives and what's supposed to be important, what's not supposed to be important, and play with that. You can power people into your content, if you like, utilizing a better understanding of how content works.
Right.
Which is quite simplistic, but it's a science of understanding in a simple way how it does actually work.
I wonder how far we actually are from systems like that really coming into the mass appeal. Maybe 10 years.
It's interesting to see whether artificial intelligence creates a way to do it, because it should.
Right, yeah.
People do it in hedge funds with quant funds where they deliberately get bad news and track a hysterical response through press cuttings and bet on where the share price will go based on people's response to bad news. And they make money on bad news because they can track and guess where it will go. So there's no reason why a PR company generated by AI couldn't also be the creator of the bad news.
Sure.
Right,
yeah. I mean, you seem to be very active on Twitter and have a very strong view on artificial intelligence. Just in general, I mean, how do you see the future of technology and in particular AI kind of impacting us? I know there's a lot of different opinions out there. 10, 20 years from now, what do you see just in general?
It's hard to tell because you get people, before he died, Stephen Hawking, saying either AI is the greatest thing or it's the destroyer of humanity.
Sure.
Maybe it's a bit of both. But if it's left, I mean, I went to an experiment at New Zealand House with Shane Legg, who was one of the co-founders of DeepMind.
Yep.
And he just sold it to Google for like millions and millions.
Yep.
But he's been quite outspoken. I don't see him speaking much now. Google owns him because he seems to say it as it is. He's saying he's desperately worried about humanity because when I saw the experiment with an old 80s game with the supercomputer at work, what seemed to happen by default is AI would always overcome every single problem, always dominate and overpower, and always win at all costs. And when I was strapped to an old Space Invaders game or when it was strapped to something else, every time the AI device would overcome all these little Space Invaders and then blast them out of the sky. So it seemed to be, wow. So the instinct is to kill and dominate and destroy by default. So how do we take that? Who knows? So that's the concern about AI. But we're going to. But then at the same time, AI can help with so many things, from environmental technologies to. There's a real debate to be had, but I don't think we're having the right debate because it seems to be a capitalist, venture capital funded land grab at the moment.
It's a very interesting time. I know Google's motto has been for decades, "Don't be evil," but I don't know how long that's going to hold true.
You always worry when people have a slogan because it's usually like 1984. It's usually quite the opposite. Don't be evil, they're evil. Corporations do the same thing with their corporate responsibility funds. The worst polluters in terms of the environment in the UK is a company called Ineos, yet it's going around pretending to be an environmental-led company.
Interesting. And thanks so much, Richard. I have one question from our audience here. With so many political injustices in the world today and a vastly centralized government across the Western world, what is your opinion on decentralized systems such as blockchain?
Well, I think they're crucial to maintain free speech, and Julian Assange will attest to that. That encrypted technology is the only way, ultimately, we're all going to be able to communicate and basically and not ensure we're going to get sort of like the telly screen arresting us for a thought crime.
Right, 1984.
But whether they try and stop encrypted technology next, so no one can have, I don't think they're going to be able to manage to do that.
Right. Yeah.
We just have to keep moving the goalposts so we stay free. Otherwise, we're just going to be a scene like the Matrix with pipes in the back of our head feeding us nutrients. Otherwise,
couldn't agree with you more, Richard. And just one more: with the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee being in contact with Julian Assange, what ethical standards, in your opinion, are needed for Julian to testify, if at all?
Well, I mean, that obviously it's been reported, and Jennifer Robinson put out a statement about that, who's going to be speaking at your conference. But there has to be absolute assurances. And when people have given testimony before, there's been like an immunisation. So in a way, this may be an opportunity for Julian Assange to ensure that he will not spend the rest of his life in prison if he participates. So that's an opportunity. But whether they'll be true to their word needs to be seen. The problem you've got is the American government don't seem to adhere to what the United Nations.
Right.
They just remove themselves from the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And if the Americans say, "Don't worry, we're not going to prosecute, thank you for participation," he's taking a huge risk. They won't go back on their word.
Right.
Will they stay true to their word? That's the challenge.
Yeah, it's a very big challenge. It's going to be interesting.
Conversations are going on at the moment, obviously.
Got it.
And there hasn't been a resolution yet either way. So watch the space.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining us on this cast of the Blockcast. Really appreciate the conversation. Was very insightful for myself. One of the most insightful we've had, in fact. I hope our audience enjoys it. And be sure to visit us at the World Data Forum. Richard, thanks so much for your support there. It's been a pleasure working with you on a lot of initiatives for it. Again, that's September 19th and 20th in the World Trade Center in Barcelona. And be sure to visit Richard's website at 6hillgrovepr.com. for 6 Hillgrove Public Relations.
Thank you. Thanks, Sergio.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.